Down through the years, a lot of different forms of people development processes have been identified. And as I think about this, a lot of these in the past were done by the ministers of the local congregation. They were the ones who were the experts in how did you help people deal with challenges in life or with problems that they had not anticipated. And as many things that have started out in the church, these have spun off and become separate disciplines, separate practices. But I want to talk about a few of these. There is a chart with these in the Disciple Development Coaching book, pages 20 and 21. And I want to just review these for a few minutes and look at some of the key characteristics and compare them to the coaching process that we're going to be involved in. One of the helping professions or helping approaches is consulting. Consulting is something that we probably have taken advantage of at one time or another in the life of our congregations. We've brought somebody in who could help us to deal with a particular situation. It might be a building program, it might be a financial campaign, it might be a conflict resolution. But basically in a consulting situation, we bring in a person who has a certain level of expertise and they make some recommendations related to that. They are problem solvers. Mentoring is a people helping process. Most often mentoring centers on a person who has a certain amount of experience and background sharing their information with another individual. They are an expert in their field, they have a great deal of experience in their field, and then they share that with a person who is trying to learn that field. Very often the person they're working with is a protege or an apprentice that they're working with. In the coaching field, we're looking at helping people to develop, to discover their growing edge and to live into that. And very often they already know more about what they need to do than they're doing, and the coach helps the person to discover that and to move forward in that area. Spiritual direction is a field that some of us may have had some work in and even been certified in. But spiritual direction is basically helping the person to discover what God is saying, and that may involve teaching the person some disciplines, helping them to practice certain spiritual disciplines or practices so that they can become more sensitive to what God may be saying to them. And then you have the counseling and therapy approach, which is helping people to understand their hurts, their experiences of the past, and processing them in such a way that they can deal with those and move on from there. As you can see, some of these things kind of blend into each other, but we're going to look at these more or less from the standpoint of distinctive disciplines, and we can talk a little bit in a few minutes about how they might complement one another. Look at the expertise focus in each of these areas. In consulting, the expertise is provided by the consultant. In mentoring, the expertise is the wisdom of the mentor. In coaching, the expertise is within the client. It's not about the coach's ability as far as their background experience, it's the client's experience. In spiritual direction, the focus is on the client's spiritual journey and is usually very much an internal kind of experience for the person who's being worked with in a spiritual direction experience. Then, of course, in counseling and therapy, the therapist is the one who carries the heavy work here. In counseling, once the person has surfaced the things he or she wants to deal with, the therapist really is the one who moves that along to some kind of constructive conclusion. Probably one of the best ways to see the difference in all of these is the time orientation. For a consulting situation, you're dealing with the present, with the here and now. Here's the problem we have to deal with. What are we going to do about it? For in the mentoring situation, you're looking at the past experiences of the mentor especially, but also how does that apply to the protege in the here and now. And then you, under the coaching is present and future oriented. What's going on now? What do you want to accomplish in the future? And then in spiritual direction is past and present oriented. And then therapy is usually very oriented towards the past. You know, what got you to where you are now? And then what are you going to do about that? There are different ways we can look at this. One way to look at it is how do these contrast with each other and how they complement each other. In coaching and consulting, for example, and the kind of work that we tend to do, there's a very fine line between coaching and consulting. When I work with a pastor, I have to be very careful that I don't move into my consulting mode. And if I feel led in that direction, I basically stop and say, okay, I'm going to take off my coaching hat right now, and I want to put on my consulting hat. Is that okay? And then share my insight or my experience or something I've observed somewhere else that might apply in that particular situation. But I'm very clear in saying, I'm no longer building on your expertise. I'm inserting something into the process. So there's a difference there in those approaches. Coaching and mentoring, again, there's a fine line between coaching and mentoring. Especially in working with younger pastors, I very often find myself wanting to put on the mentor hat. And when I feel led in that direction, I have to stop and either not do it or say to the person, if it's okay with you, I would like to move into the mentor role for a moment and share some observations with you from my experience or from what I know about this. I think it's very possible that we can move from a mentoring experience into a coaching experience. I'm not sure we can move back the other way. I think once you've been totally involved in coaching, it's hard to move back to the mentoring side of it. When we work here at the seminary, we have a program now with the Create students, Create Master of Divinity students, where we have mentor coaches. And those people are really fulfilling two roles. They're mentors and they're coaches. They're mentors from the standpoint of they have expertise they're sharing with students, and they're helping them to process what they're learning and helping them to select internships and that kind of thing that they can learn from. The coaching aspect comes more down the line as the person starts developing their capstone project, as they start setting some vocational goals. That's more about what does the student want to do? You know, what are the student's concerns? And so you shift subtly from the mentoring to the coaching. Very fine line, but it's important to have that distinction, because when we talk about coaching, we're talking about the person who is being coached is the expert on their situation. And especially as we do disciple development coaching, we're drawing on their expertise. We can talk a little bit more about how we might pull back and provide more of a mentoring role in that as well. But there are very fine lines between some of these. One of the issues that we need to think about, and I will come back and talk about this again more later, but the coaching and counseling situation, I have a number of friends who have been counselors and who are now coaches. But they make a clear distinction between when they're coaching and when they're counseling. Mark Tidsworth with Pinnacle was a marriage and family therapist and still does some practice as a marriage and family therapist. But he has his coaching hat and he has his counseling hat. And there's a difference between the two. And there are situations that I've been in where I've coached people where I recommended that they needed a counselor. I was doing a coaching situation with a pastor, and as we got into some of the things he wanted to deal with, it was very clear that he was really talking about some marriage issues, and we talked about that a little bit. And I said, how would you feel about you and your wife being involved in marriage and family therapy? And he was very open to that, and I was able to put him in touch with somebody, make a referral there, and then we could move on and talk about the other things. But he was getting into some things related to their relationship that were really not coaching topics. They could be, but in this situation they weren't. It was clear that there was some dysfunction there that they had to deal with. How do you deal with that if you're doing disciple development coaching in a congregation? We'll talk in a few minutes about some specifics, about some things, some indicators that would say this person needs to be referred to a counselor. But I think that's one of the responsibilities we have in doing coaching, is we have to realize when have we moved beyond the bounds of being a coach, or is there a need there that needs to be addressed that I cannot address, and be aware of that. So that's one of the main reasons we talk about the differences in these different people helping professions. They're all important, they're all significant, but they all have their own roles to play. And we want to keep coaching very focused towards what is the client all about, what's the client's expertise, what are the disciples' expertise, how can we help them to leverage what they already know to be more effective.